I still remember the day my so-called best friend stole my rich fiancé, the sting of betrayal scorching my chest like an open wound. We'd been inseparable since childhood, sharing dreams and daring each other to reach for the sky. Yet in one blistering afternoon, I watched him crush all that trust beneath his polished shoes and walk away with the woman I believed was my future. A decade later, after countless sleepless nights, after burying rage and heartbreak under layers of forced smiles, he reappeared like a smug ghost, mocking my single status while flaunting the opulent life he'd secured through my stolen bride. But he hadn't counted on seeing my wife. For years, the memory of that fateful day lay in ambush at the back of my mind. It didn't matter how many times I tried to drown it in new routines, new friendships, and fleeting romances. The image of him strolling arm in arm with my then-fiancée refused to die. The heartbreak had etched itself into every corner of my being, shaping my decisions and haunting my quiet moments. Her name was Cassandra. We'd met at a fundraiser in one of the city's most iconic hotels, a place where the chime of champagne glasses mingled with murmured laughter. She was everything I wasn't, poised, wealthy, certain of her place in the world. She lit up rooms with her confidence and made me believe that, through her, I could shine too. My best friend, ex-best friend to be precise, was Daniel. We'd grown up in the same gritty neighborhood, forging our bond over scraped knees, stolen baseballs, and shared ambitions of success. We'd promised each other that we'd rise above the struggles of our upbringing. But success, as I discovered, had a twisted way of poisoning good intentions. When Cassandra and I got engaged, Daniel's closeness to her seemed natural. He was family to me. Never once did I suspect he would scoop her away just when we were about to finalize wedding details. I don't remember the exact conversation where I realized she was leaving me for him. I do, however, remember the humiliation, the sense of my whole life turning into quicksand. That day, Daniel had the gall to act like a concerned friend, trying to soften the blow of his own betrayal. "We never meant to hurt you," he said even as he took her hand in front of me. My fists clenched so tightly that my nails left half-moon marks in my palms. Instead of lashing out, I walked away. Rage and heartbreak twisted in my gut, but I refused to let them see me break down. 10 years passed. I sculpted a new version of myself out of that pain. I scrapped the wedding plans, sold the ring, and threw myself into my career, finance, ironically enough. It had never been my greatest passion, but with enough determination, I became good at it. I climbed the corporate ladder, each rung fueled by a mixture of resentment and a deep-seated need to prove that Daniel hadn't robbed me of my potential. Sometimes at night, I dreamt of what could have been if Cassandra had chosen differently. Fleeting images of the life we'd planned came to me like a broken reel of film. A house on the river, a garden where she'd plant roses, the two of us hosting dinner parties where Daniel would clink glasses in genuine friendship. But each morning reality weighed in, that life was never going to happen. I found fleeting companionship in short relationships, none of which lasted. My friends poked fun at my eternal bachelor status, not knowing that a piece of me had calcified the day Cassandra walked away with Daniel. Trust didn't come easily anymore, and whenever a romantic partner tried to peel back my layers, I'd freeze up. The ghost of betrayal whispered that I'd only get hurt again. Then, one sweltering summer afternoon, I caught a glimpse of Daniel's name in a business magazine. He and Cassandra had spearheaded some massive philanthropic project, an art institution in the city's revitalized downtown area. My heart jolted. There was a photo, Daniel, hair now peppered with slight silver, with Cassandra by his side, her arm looped through his. They looked every inch the power couple, exuding wealth and confidence. My stomach churned at the memories. I flung the magazine aside, determined not to let it sabotage the progress I'd made. But fate, it seemed, was not done tormenting me. A week later, I received an ornate envelope in the mail, an invitation to the grand opening of that very art institution, addressed to me by name. For several minutes, I debated tossing it straight into the trash. Why would they invite me, of all people? Was it Daniel's twisted sense of humor, or had Cassandra insisted we keep things civil after all these years? I considered ignoring it. However, a dark part of me, the one that still burned with unanswered questions, insisted I go. Maybe I wanted to see them face to face, to show them I wasn't broken or bitter. Or maybe I needed some twisted sense of closure. Regardless, on the night of the event, I found myself dressed in my best suit, stepping out of a cab in front of the imposing marble edifice they now owned. The gala was in full swing, all opulence and glimmering lights. I slipped into the crowd, snagged a flute of champagne from a passing server, and did my best to blend in. The room buzzed with chatter, peppered with polite laughter. I was scanning the sea of tuxedos and gowns when I spotted him. Daniel, standing near an exhibit piece that looked like a tangle of neon wires. Cassandra was nowhere in sight, at least not yet. My heart thudded, a dull, familiar ache returning. For a moment I debated retreating. But then I remembered who I was now, the life I'd built from the wreckage. I squared my shoulders and approached. He caught sight of me, and a flicker of something, surprise? Unease? Registered on his face. Still, he extended a hand, his grin as confident as ever. Well, he drawled, voice carrying a hint of condescension I recalled too well. It's been a long time. Didn't think you'd accept the invite? His eyes flicked over my attire, scanning me like I was an old rival to be sized up. I shrugged, forcing a casual tone. Curiosity got the best of me. I took a measured sip of champagne, letting the bubbles fizz on my tongue as I willed myself not to snap at him. He was older, but still handsome in that polished way that suggested wealth and security. Our old neighborhood's rough edges were nowhere to be seen on him. He let out a laugh that grated on my nerves. And here I thought you were too busy enjoying your single life. My grip on the champagne tightened. So that's how we're playing this? I kept my composure, refusing to flinch. I manage, I said, mustering a half smile. And you? I see you've done well for yourself. He leaned forward, voice dropping conspiratorially. Cassandra's money does wonders, doesn't it? Of course, I've made my own contributions. His eyes glinted with a smugness that made my stomach twist. And you? I haven't seen any wedding announcements. Or have I missed something? I inhaled sharply. So that's his angle. He wanted to remind me I was alone, that he'd won the game of life. My mind flashed back to the day he took Cassandra from me, her tear-filled eyes, his hand on the small of her back. But I swallowed the bitterness. I was no longer that broken man. My next words came out cooler than ice. I'm not in the habit of broadcasting every personal development, Daniel. An amused glimmer danced in his eyes. Ah, so still single then. That's all right. Not everyone's built for marriage. He took a sip of his own drink, sighing theatrically. I guess I should thank you, old friend. After all, if you two hadn't... Shut up, I whispered before I could stop myself. The anger tasted metallic in my mouth, adrenaline coursing through my veins. He raised an eyebrow, feigning innocent surprise. Touchy are we? He said, scanning the crowd as though bored. Then his gaze snapped back to me. No need for hostility. It's just interesting, isn't it? We started in the same place, but here we are, living vastly different lives. My wife, my fortune, and you, well, you have your finance job, right? The gall of him. The sheer audacity to stand there, mocking the path I'd taken, as though the success I'd found was nothing compared to the trophy he'd won in Cassandra. My entire body tensed, an internal battle raging between the desire to walk away and the impulse to respond in kind. A part of me prayed for an interruption, a chance to slip out and preserve my dignity. Right on cue, a gentle hand touched my shoulder from behind. I turned, fully expecting to see a server or an acquaintance. But it was neither. My heart nearly stopped when I saw her. Graceful in a midnight blue gown, face radiating a serene confidence, she took my arm with an air of quiet possessiveness. Her smile, warm and open, made the corners of her eyes crinkle with genuine affection. This is the friend you mentioned? She asked, her voice carrying a hint of laughter that only I could decipher. She turned to Daniel, sizing him up in a single measured glance. I'm so glad we finally get to meet. I've heard stories. For a second, Daniel looked startled, his bravado faltering. My new companion, my wife, though Daniel didn't yet realize, inclined her head, offering a polite greeting. The brief flicker of confusion on his face was priceless. He hadn't expected me to show up with someone, let alone a woman who exuded the same effortless grace Cassandra once did. Pleasure, Daniel managed, regaining his composure. I wasn't aware our mutual friend here was married. He tends to keep his personal life, well, personal. Her eyes sparkled and she laughed softly. We both value privacy, but that doesn't mean we're hermits. She slid her arm from mine and extended a hand toward Daniel. I'm Althea. We've been married for about a year now. 1 year. Hardly a lifetime, but every day with Althea had felt like a gentle, healing breeze washing over old wounds. We met not long after I'd finally decided to open up to the possibility of love again. She was a fiercely intelligent architect who'd relocated to the city, also nursing scars from her past. Our bond formed slowly, nurtured by mutual respect and unwavering honesty. Daniel's eyes flicked between us, evidently trying to reconcile the image of me, the jilted fiancé from a decade ago, with the man who now stood confidently at Althea's side. I could see the wheels turning behind his expression, calculating how to respond. "Congratulations," he said, fixing on a polite smile that fell short of reaching his eyes. "I'm sure you two are very happy." Althea beamed. "We are," she replied, looping her arm through mine again. Then she glanced at me with a conspiratorial smile. "But enough about us. I believe we were in the middle of something?" I swallowed the surge of triumphant satisfaction that threatened to bubble up. Daniel had singled me out as a lonely has-been, only to discover I wasn't the man he assumed. I might still carry scars, but I'd moved on, happily in fact. The temptation to rub it in was strong, but I'd learned long ago that stooping to his level would only tarnish my own peace. Instead, I squeezed Althea's hand gently and said, "We were just catching up." The final two words dripped with quiet irony. He adjusted his posture, trying to regain control of the situation. "So, how about Cassandra? I'm sure she'd love to meet your wife. She's around here somewhere, mingling with the donors." At the mention of Cassandra, Althea shot me a brief, questioning glance. I told her the broad strokes of my history, but we'd never run into my ex and Daniel together. She nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding that the next move was mine. I forced a cordial nod. "Sure. It's been a while, but I guess we can say hello." Before Daniel could respond, a voice from behind him piped up, "Honey, I was looking for you. There are some guests you simply must meet." My stomach clenched. That voice, still velvet smooth after all these years, triggered an avalanche of memories. Cassandra, stepping forward in a silver gown that made her look every bit the socialite. She paused as her gaze landed on me, then flicked to Althea. Her manicured fingers tightened around the champagne flute she held. "Cassandra," I said, my tone carefully polite. "Nice to see you." My heart pounded in my ears, a mix of old resentments and fresh vulnerability colliding. 10 years, but she still carried that aura of wealth and prestige. Her posture, her subtle gestures, all screamed of the life she'd chosen. Her eyes flicked between me and Althea. I didn't realize you'd be here," she murmured, a slight tremor betraying her own discomfort. Then, recovering, she turned to Althea with the same polished smile she'd used at all those high-society events we once attended. "I'm Cassandra. And you are?" Althea's smile remained warm. "Althea, his wife," she said, letting the word wife punctuate the air. I detected a faint edge in her voice, as though politely drawing a boundary. Cassandra's composure almost faltered, her gaze darting to Daniel in confusion. And thus, in the midst of an opulent crowd and shimmering lights, we stood, for entangled lives, bound by old betrayals, new alliances, and the complicated tapestry of fate. My heart hammered with the weight of what was left unspoken. Resentment, lost dreams, the quiet triumph of having built a new life. I could see Daniel's earlier smugness wavering, as though a door had opened into a chapter of my life he never anticipated. I inhaled, steeling myself. This confrontation was inevitable, but also an opportunity. 10 years had passed since the day my friend-turned-traitor took my fiancée. He had sought to humiliate me again by mocking my single status, but the presence of my wife at my side changed the dynamic. I glanced at Althea, drawing strength from her steady calm, and a sense of pride welled up. "I am not the same man you left behind, Cassandra." And if Daniel wanted a war of words, he would find me unyielding. But as I braced for whatever would come next, for the polite jabs, the swirling tension, the unspoken regrets, another part of me yearned for closure. Maybe it was time to face the past head-on, to let those old wounds bleed out in the open so they could finally heal. For a decade, I dreamed of some kind of resolution, an apology, or at least an acknowledgement. Now, in the midst of the city's elite, with Daniel and Cassandra in front of me and Althea standing in solidarity at my side, the moment had arrived. I could feel Althea's gaze on me, silently asking if I was ready. The swirling crowd, the music, the clink of glasses, everything faded to the background. All that existed was the circle of four, tethered by a complicated history. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt ready to break the silence that had weighed on me for so long. A hush seemed to descend around us, as though the swirl of elegant guests, the tinkling piano music, and the clink of champagne glasses had receded into a blurred backdrop. Cassandra stood before me with her forced smile, Daniel shifted uncomfortably at her side, and Althea, my wife, looked on with an unwavering calm that steadied my nerves. For a moment none of us spoke. 10 years of resentment, betrayal, and unvoiced questions hung in the air, demanding resolution, or at least acknowledgement. I cleared my throat, drawing a breath I hoped would fortify me for what lay ahead. "Cassandra," I began, forcing myself to meet her gaze. My own pulse roared in my ears, but I clung to Althea's quiet presence. It's been a long time. Her guarded expression wavered. Yes, it has, she said softly. I never thought. I didn't expect to run into you here. Daniel mentioned you might come, but I thought you wouldn't. She broke off, flicking a glance toward Daniel, who wore a tense, polished smile. I knew he was measuring every word, trying to gauge how this conversation might reflect on him in front of the wealthy patrons milling around. Good. Let him squirm. It's a beautiful event, Althea interjected, gesturing at the shimmering decor. Your new art institution is quite the accomplishment. Cassandra's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Thank you, she murmured as if grateful for the shift in topic. We've invested a lot of time into this place. I'm glad you could come. Her last word landed awkwardly, overshadowed by the memory of how we all ended up here. Something in me stirred, an old ache, a pang of Wattis. But I forced it down, reminding myself that I stood with Althea now. That chapter of heartbreak and betrayal was over, no matter how deeply it had scarred me. And yet, seeing Cassandra up close, I couldn't help but recall the lavish plans we'd once made, the illusions we'd woven about our future. I wondered if she felt that same flicker of regret, or if she truly moved on without a backward glance. Daniel, striving to maintain the confident persona he'd cultivated, cleared his throat. Let's not crowd the entry, shall we? There's a quieter spot near the back. We can talk there. His voice was lower than before, the mocking edge replaced by something cautious. Maybe he realized that his earlier jabs at my single status no longer held weight. I exchanged a look with Althea. She offered a reassuring nod, so I followed Daniel and Cassandra through the throng of visitors. We ended up in a smaller gallery off the main hall, where abstract paintings decorated the walls in a kaleidoscope of color. Soft overhead lights cast a diffused glow that felt oddly intimate. A few patrons drifted in and out, murmuring appreciations of the art, but no one lingered. We had the space mostly to ourselves, and the sense of privacy pressed down on me like a weight. Althea and I stood side by side. Cassandra glanced at the paintings as though searching for composure among their bold strokes, while Daniel turned to face me. His expression was guarded but not as smug as before. So, he said, voice low, I suppose we should address the elephant in the room. I didn't flinch. Which elephant is that? The one about how you two left me to pick up the pieces 10 years ago? Or the one where you tried to belittle my life again tonight? He swallowed, lips tightening. I never meant to belittle you, he said quietly. That was a moment of poor taste. Cassandra spoke up, eyes flicking between us. Please, let's not turn this into a scene. We owe you an apology, both of us. I know it doesn't change what happened, but... Her voice hitched, and I saw something like genuine remorse flicker in her eyes. I remembered the day she left with Daniel, how she'd avoided looking me in the eye, how her guilt warred with her decision. It hadn't made it hurt any less, but it meant she wasn't entirely heartless. I exhaled, letting the bitterness I'd carried so long swirl at the edges of my awareness before speaking. Go on, I said, my tone subdued. I'm listening. She glanced down, took a breath, and then met my gaze. The truth is, I was young and reckless. I thought I wanted a different kind of life, and Daniel seemed to offer that. I'd grown up in privilege, but I was afraid of losing it. You were always so honest, so determined to make it on your own merit, and I panicked that we wouldn't fit in my world. I convinced myself Daniel was the safer bet. Her words stung, but I found myself appreciating the candidness. Safer bet, I repeated, the taste of it sour in my mouth. Because he had access to money sooner? Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded, conceding the point. My father left me a sizable inheritance when he passed, he said, voice stiff. Cassandra found comfort in that stability, especially since her parents were pushing for a certain lifestyle. He let out a breath. I know it sounds crass, but it's what happened. We never meant to betray you so brutally. We just fell into it. Fell into it, I echoed, recalling the day I watched them walk away. The excuses felt thin, but maybe that was the nature of betrayal. There was no neat rationale to justify hurting someone. So that's it? You took the easy route? A flicker of shame passed across Cassandra's face. Yes, she whispered. And I've regretted it ever since. Her admission, quiet as it was, rattled something inside me. All those years of imagining them living lavishly at my expense. Maybe the path wasn't entirely paved with joy on their end. Maybe the ghosts had haunted them too. It didn't erase what they did, but it caused a crack in the wall of resentment I'd built. Sensing the tension, Althea spoke up, her voice calm yet pointed. That's all in the past. But you did try to humiliate my husband this evening. And let's be clear, he's accomplished plenty on his own. I don't know why you felt the need to undermine him. Daniel's cheeks reddened slightly. I was caught off guard. When I saw him, all those old insecurities rose up. I wanted to feel like I still had the upper hand, I guess. He avoided my eyes. Childish, I know. After everything, I should have known better. The weight of a decade's worth of pain pressed into my chest, but I stayed grounded, Althea's presence a gentle reminder of how far I'd come. People change, I said, forcing a steadier tone. I'm not the same man you left behind. I've built a life, a career. I found love again. I took Althea's hand. I don't need your validation. But your attempt to belittle me was uncalled for. He nodded, swallowing. You're right. I'm sorry. The sincerity in his eyes felt odd, given how strongly I'd once hated him. I guess I always wondered if you resented me as much as I suspected. And seeing you here, I panicked. I defaulted to being a jerk. A tense quiet fell between us, heavy with the ghosts of our shared past. Cassandra moved closer, regarding me with a mournful expression I'd never seen on her face before. It was never about you not being good enough, she said, voice trembling. If anything, you were too pure, too honest. I was weak. I took a shortcut because I was afraid I'd lose my family's approval or my social standing. I wanted a guaranteed future. Instead, I got a constant reminder that I'd hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I studied her face, searching for any traces of deception. All I saw was remorse. For a second, I felt the sting of pity, not for me but for the woman who had chosen wealth over love, only to realize it wasn't a perfect formula for happiness. A decade ago, I would have scoffed at the idea of pitying Cassandra. Now, it softened some of the anger lodged inside me like shrapnel. Althea's hand squeezed mine gently, reminding me I wasn't alone in this confrontation. That silent gesture gave me the courage to inhale and let go of some of the bile I'd carried for so long. What's done is done, I said quietly, not wanting to keep dancing around these confessions. I can't say I forgive you. At least not entirely. But I'm not going to let this define me anymore. Daniel's gaze flitted to Althea again and then back to me. I understand. Thank you for even hearing us out. We never gave you that courtesy before. I felt a twitch of a bitter smile. You can't change what happened, I said. But maybe we can agree not to keep ripping the scab off. I have a life, a wife, and frankly, I'm doing fine without your approval. To my surprise, Daniel's shoulders sagged with relief, and Cassandra's eyes glistened. She reached out as though she might place a hand on my arm, but thought better of it. I appreciate that, she managed. And I'm truly happy for you. Seeing you with someone who treats you right, it's good. At that, I turned to Althea, who gave me an encouraging nod. The moment felt strangely surreal, as though I were watching a stage play featuring people who had once shaped my entire universe, but who no longer had the same hold on my life. 10 years ago, I couldn't have imagined a scenario where I'd be calmly standing in a gallery, exchanging truths with the two who'd crushed me. Yet here we were, all older, all bearing scars we'd inflicted or endured. A polite cough behind us made us all turn. A well-dressed older man, presumably a patron or sponsor, stood near the entrance to the gallery, looking mildly curious about the private gathering. Daniel quickly stepped away from us, adopting his polished host persona. Yes, just a moment, he said, offering the man a practiced smile. I'll be right with you. Then he turned back to me, hesitance in his eyes. We should probably wrap this up. The night is about the institution after all. Cassandra nodded, reclaiming her composure. Right. We have a speech to give in a few minutes. Her eyes flicked to Althea again. It was nice meeting you. And I'm glad you two found each other. Althea inclined her head politely, then slid her arm through mine. Likewise. Without another word, Daniel and Cassandra drifted away, moving toward their waiting patron. Althea and I watched them go, a complicated mixture of relief and lingering sadness welling up in me. I turned to my wife, exhaling shakily. That was intense. She nodded, tracing a gentle hand along my jawline. You handled it well. I'm proud of you. I realized my heart was racing, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. But beneath that, there was a sense of weight lifting, like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Had we just found a measure of closure? It wasn't exactly forgiveness. More like a mutual acknowledgement that the past was the past, and we didn't need to keep it as a burning brand on our souls. Do you want to leave? Althea asked quietly, scanning my face for signs of distress. We can slip out the side and avoid any more drama. I mulled it over, looking around the gallery at the vibrant art, the guests chatting amiably. I could see Cassandra and Daniel in the distance, greeting another group with those perfected social smiles. For all their wealth and success, I sensed a tension in the lines of their bodies. Maybe they never truly escaped the guilt, I thought. I took Althea's hand, entwining my fingers with hers. No, I said, surprising even myself. Let's stay a bit longer. We came to enjoy the art after all. And maybe in a subtle way to show that I wouldn't slink away as if ashamed. She smiled, leaning into me in a brief show of affection. All right, let's do it. But first, let's find some water or something. My throat's parched from all this tension. I gave a short laugh, grateful for her lightness. Arm in arm, we strolled back into the main hall, weaving through the throngs of donors and art enthusiasts. The air buzzed with cultured chatter, but my mind was elsewhere, on the conversation that had just transpired, on the faint stirrings of acceptance in my chest. A bartender offered us sparkling water, and we took it, sipping as we paused before an installation of swirling colors and shapes. From a short distance, I saw Daniel stepping onto a small stage with a microphone, Cassandra by his side. They began addressing the attendees, thanking them for contributions, praising the city's renewed commitment to the arts. Their performance was polished, a united front. For an instant, an echo of old bitterness nudged me. That could have been me up there, standing with Cassandra. But the thought dissolved quickly when I felt Althea's hand on my arm. No, I found my own path, I reminded myself. And it's far more real than any facade I left behind. The speech ended with polite applause. People dispersed, seeking more wine, more conversation. Daniel caught my eye for a brief second, nodded in polite acknowledgement, and turned back to greet a wealthy couple. Cassandra disappeared into the crowd, her silver gown blending among other glittering dresses. Leaning against a marble pillar, I let out a long breath. Althea studied me for a moment. "How do you feel?" she asked gently. "Lighter," I admitted. "Like a weight's been lifted." I didn't get an apology back then, but hearing them own up to it now, it doesn't erase the past, but it helps. We sipped our water, letting the chaotic swirl of the event continue around us. Eventually, we found ourselves drawn to a quieter alcove where a large tapestry hung. It depicted a phoenix rising from ashes, an explosion of reds and golds woven into every thread. I stood there, mesmerized by the craftsmanship, thinking how apt the image felt. From destruction, rebirth. Althea slid her arm around my waist, her voice tender. "It's stunning, isn't it?" I nodded. "Absolutely." For a few minutes, we were content just to admire the tapestry, the intricacy of the details. And in that silence, I realized that the conversation with Daniel and Cassandra, while painful, was something I'd needed to face. Maybe we'd never be friends. Maybe we'd never share another word after tonight. But the confrontational bitterness I'd harbored had finally dissipated under the weight of their confessions, and under the strength I'd discovered in myself. "I think I'm ready to go," I said quietly, turning to Althea. She met my eyes, a hint of concern there. "You sure?" she asked. "Yeah," I confirmed, a small smile forming. "I've seen everything I need to see." She laced her fingers with mine. As we walked toward the exit, I felt a sense of resolution settling inside me. The city lights greeted us outside, reflecting off the glass facade of the museum. The night air was cool, a gentle reminder of life moving forward. I took one last glance at the building behind us, so grand, so full of the legacy that Daniel and Cassandra had built. It was no longer a symbol of my loss but merely a building, a testament to their choices. In the taxi ride home, Althea rested her head on my shoulder, and I gazed out at the streets rushing by. Traffic lights flickered green to yellow to red, each transition a small sign of changes that come and go in life. I thought about the man I'd been a decade ago, raw and broken, and the man I was now, still healing but no longer defined by the betrayal that once nearly consumed me. Before we reached our home, I glanced down at Althea, grateful for her unwavering support, her gentle humor, and the love she offered so freely. The bitterness I'd clung to for years had found its release in a single night. The confrontation had been messy and painful, but it had also allowed me to see how far I'd grown. My best friend had stolen my rich fiancé long ago, leaving me wounded and alone, but I'd emerged stronger, forging a life and a marriage based on honesty, respect, and mutual understanding. He can keep his old illusions of grandeur, I thought. I have something far more real. Closing my eyes, I felt the tension melt away. Tomorrow, the city would buzz on as always, and I would go about my life, content in the knowledge that the ghosts of my past no longer had the power to weigh me down. And for the first time in 10 years, I welcomed the dawn with a heart that felt unexpectedly at peace.